Hey there guys, Tim here with Two Feathers Survival. Wanted to get out and do a little bit of hiking. I haven't had a chance to really try out my new pack yet. I like it. It rides very well. Actually got my bedroll down kind of on the bottom of that, and that also fits to the pack beautifully. It's just kind of the right size for the style of bushcraft that I tend to find myself doing. Kind of something between not going full primitive mountain man style and kind of in between that and maybe a more primitive style to try to source more things from the natural environment here. Which kind of brings me to today's topic. Today's topic is the fifth part of our week-long discussion of the 5 C's. And today we're on covering. Well, if you happen to be a Les Stroud fan, and I used to watch a lot of his shows. He quit making it when his son had gotten stricken with cancer. I believe it was leukemia, fairly bad. Also read a couple of his books, and he writes great books as well. So if you get a chance to pick up any of his books, they're packed with knowledge. And the thing that I really like about Les as well, he tends to show a real-world scenario and bring that back into maybe steps that were taken wrong, or things that can be done better. As long as you have survived whatever encounter that you find yourself in, well then you have won. You've come back in peace with all your digits and toes and legs and arms still working, then you have won that encounter for that day. So that's a good books to read if you happen to be a bookworm and you really want to be into this subject, then they're great books to study. Why I mention Les is a simple fact that he brings up a zone of assessments, and there's actually 3 zones. I'm not going to get into all of those now because it's a bit off topic with our discussion about covering. But his first zone of assessment is actually what's on his person. Covering, a lot of people think of, well, that's shelter. Well, yes, you're right, it is shelter. But don't forget, if I have the proper clothes on for the environment that I find myself in, and I've layered that clothing appropriately from a base layer or undergarment layer up through t-shirts, maybe a lightweight sweatshirt underneath, and then a jacket or a wool jacket or anorak or whatever environment that you find yourself in, well then I can peel those layers off as I go throughout my journey in nature. Today's a day, it's about maybe 38 degrees right now. It's a bit chilly here in the sunny south. Thankfully I do have sun up, but I do need a light jacket on. Another thing that Les always says is if you sweat, you die. And he's right. If you sweat and then you lay down and try to get some sleep someplace in a cold environment, there is a high probability that your sweat will then start to chill you to a point that you could become hypothermic. So all of those are great points. But if you think about covering as your first layer of clothing that you have, or your clothing that you have on your body, that I guess I should say, and I've dressed appropriately for the situation that I'll find myself in, then I've won on that given topic. Les tells a story about where a father and his son don't have much on them. It's a kind of a warm day, a bit warmer than what it is now. It's in the 50s and maybe a little bit higher than that, into the 60s. Father and his son go out hiking a trail that they're quite familiar with. This is in Colorado in that spring kind of change time. Well, out of nowhere, a winter storm kind of crops up, and they both wind up becoming hypothermic, and it gets very cold, and they lose their way. Now they've got to spend a night with not much by the way of covering at all. They actually survive the night by simply making a debris shelter out of piling up some leaves and then crawling into that. It's a simple way to actually make a shelter, and that was the difference of something that saved their lives. I believe actually in that story it was the son who happened to be a Boy Scout as well, and he realized that that could be done. So it's a good win for them. So covering, think about your first clothing layer, your clothing that you've brought in with you. That's a great source of covering. Now, on my pack here, I've got a bedroll down on the bottom. This is a Army wool blanket. It's a great blanket. They're very warm. I've spent a few nights out in the Smoky Mountains with not much more than this and maybe a fleece blanket underneath just to take out some of the itchiness of this blanket. But this is definitely another layer of covering. So think about covering as kind of building up a cocoon around you. Again, stressing with the rest of the 5C topic that we've talked about for the week, don't think about just one piece of this. Have multiple layers. We've already talked about our clothing as one of those layers. If I brought a blanket or two into the wilderness setting with me, or a sleeping bag, now I've got a great way to stay warm throughout the night. So another item that I have inside the bag here, and I have done a piece on this, so I'm not going to set it up today, but I actually have two things. I've got my Bluestone tarp, which is in this bag here, and I also have down in the pack as well a hammock. A hammock would be a great sleep system, especially if you have incorporated in the hammock one that actually has a built-in bug net, which the one that I have does. So between this and my tarp, now I have a way to make a bed where I'm up off the ground and raised, and then can cover it. Well, I've got everything that I need now to have a decent night's stay out in a wilderness setting. Not all the comforts of home. Didn't bring a shower with me or anything like that, obviously, but at least I've got a decent way to spend a nice, relaxing night out in the wilderness. So those are all items that you should have in your pack. You should have planned for that. Now, what if we don't have any of these items? What if we're truly just that lost hiker out in the woods? Well, that's where the other parts of the 5C come back in. Previously on this channel, I've showed you my leather pouch and kind of some of the items that I keep in there. Inside that pouch, which I keep right next to, on my belt, right next to my knife all the time when I'm out in the woods, I have everything that I need to set up the basics of 5Cs. Got some heavy gauge aluminum foil in there. I can improvise some sort of a container to boil water, to purify water. I've got several means of fire lighting and a metallic tin that I can then make char for the next time and for the next fire, which we've talked about that. If you get a good first fire, you got to immediately think about the next fire. The other things that I keep in there are some other items that would be hard to create. I do have a couple small knives in there. They're folding knives, nothing grand, but at least it's something. I have cordage in there. So now I have a way to start crafting shelter. And the other thing that I keep in one of the tins is one of those very small, and you've all seen it, the space blanket, the Mylar blankets that you buy in the camping section at Walmart. Keep one of those inside that pack as well. That way I have all on my hip the 5Cs, but they're very reduced in what I can use those for. They're also very hard to create in a wilderness setting. If I had to, in the environment that I'm in right now, find a way to craft some sort of a cutting tool or hatchet or whatever the case may be, it's going to be very hard to do. To do that process, I'd first have to find some flint or glass, nap that into a workable edge, and then find a branch or downed lumber maybe that I can then utilize to either improvise a handle for that improvised knife or start making larger tools. The amount of time that takes and the skill set that you need to have prior to going into the woods, that's something that you would really need to take time and consider. How is it exactly am I going to go about doing that? Covering, think multiples, think more than one. Think about your first layer of defense, your first zone as being the clothing that you've worn on your back. Maybe keeping in your pack an extra layer of clothing if it does get cold. Socks are very important to have. You don't want to have wet feet out in a wilderness setting. You should take your socks off as you bed down at night. Have another pair to put on, that way they are always staying dry. So all of those type of things play into the covering topic. So what I'm going to do from here is I'm going to start breaking this series out into once a week kind of episodes. And each of those episodes, and this wasn't my idea, somebody sent me a message on the YouTube channel and said, "Hey Tim, why don't you do something that ties all this together?" Well, that's a great idea, so I'm actually going to utilize your idea. You know who you are. Thank you for giving the idea, and I also appreciate you watching the channel. So that's what I'm going to do from here. I'm going to break all this down, show you a little bit more about the things that I bring into a wilderness setting with me, and start tying all of these things back together. I think that's a great follow-on topic. I'll probably take 5 weeks and tie all the things back together with this, show some different skill sets, and then we'll see where we go from there. As I made a hike through the woods today, it was a great time. I enjoy being back out in nature. It's a little wet out here today. That's why I'm sitting on a log. We've had a lot of water, and we also, if you see the woods around me, this was kind of one of the spots that I love to come because it's a little bit off the beaten path and not too far from my home. But the amount of destruction that's back in here from the hurricane that we had a few months back is pretty severe. I haven't really had a chance to come out and see this. There is a lot of damage, but there's also a lot of resources out here. Even though here we are, second week of February, I've got dandelions, I've got saw palmetto, there's leeks starting to come up in the area. So spring is on the way, at least in the low country area of South Carolina. So that's where we're going next, gang. I appreciate you staying with me for this 5-day journey through the 5 C's. There's a lot of things that we can do with this. I'll probably start incorporating some of the 10 C's into the follow-on series with this. That way you can see how this all becomes one big ball of wax. If you have at least the 5 C's in your pack, you should be ready for just about any encounter that you find yourself within. That's all the time I've got today, guys. Until next time, keep your knives sharp, keep your go bag close, and thanks for watching. Have a great day.